Hello, my name is Katie Wolf, and this semester I did a research project about formative assessment and its effects on the motivation and efficacy of my lower level English language learners. Kingley High School, where I work, is in China, and so all of our students are Chinese, making all of them English language learners. And in 7th and 8th grade, the students are all divided into two classes, labeled A level and B level. The problem with this is, of course, that when you label a student a B level student, they tend to have lower self-esteem, lower efficacy, and lower motivation. In particular, reading in English is very, very difficult for these students. Their abilities are not as low as they think they are, but their effort kind of reflects the attitudes that they've formed about themselves as students. So this research project was created as a way to help them improve their motivation and efficacy through first creating accountability and then allowing them to feel successful in an academic setting, which is something that these students had never felt before. I'll talk more about how I went about creating this accountability in just a minute, but first I want to tell you what my research questions were. The first one is, what effect does high-frequency assessment have on reading performance? And the secondary research question was how that performance affects the motivation and efficacy of reluctant readers, both in English class and other content areas as well. As we all know, there is a ton of research about reading assessment and a ton of research about reading motivation, but there are very few studies which tie the two together in the way that I was hoping to with my research. As a result of this, much of the literature I selected to review either has to do with assessment or motivation, and I had to work to bridge those ideas myself as I used them to create and implement my study. However, one article that did bridge assessment and motivation is the role of educational systems in the link between formative assessments and motivation. This is a secondary source article that asserts that formative assessment provides students with consistent feedback, which is vital to their own understanding of their strengths and needs for improvement. In this way, students who are extrinsically motivated by grades and praise of their performance will be more motivated to perform well on formative assessment, and thus more willing to take control and initiative when it comes to their skills. Nolan also makes the important distinction that, quote, in addition to providing information useful to students in self-assessment, revision, or goal setting, teachers are often concerned with affective and emotional issues of student self-esteem, confidence, and motivation to learn. Assessment can be a downright terrifying aspect of education for many students, especially my English language learners, who are not historically successful in school. This point is the main reason that I chose to incorporate feelings of success in reading for my students as they participated in this study. When students find success in this formative assessment, my hypothesis was that it would improve their motivation as well as their efficacy and help them to improve their performance on the eventual summative assessments. I then went on to review a study called Formative, Informative, and Summative Assessment, the relationship among curriculum-based measurement of reading, classroom engagement, and reading performance. This study explores and discusses curriculum-based measures of reading and their effects on student motivation and summative reading performance. This study links formative assessment specifically to reading performance, while other studies don't specify a specific content area performance that was measured. These authors used their state tests as a summative assessment and largely found that teacher-reported engagement was a strong predictor of improved performance. This is essentially the goal of my study, though I seek to find a manner of raising engagement rather than the results of raising engagement themselves. The next article I read was called Context-Specific Motivation to Read for Adolescent Struggling Readers, and it raised a point that was really the core of my study. Quote, improving adolescents' motivation to read is difficult because commonly used measures of reading motivation do not explore motivation as a function of the setting, end quote. Since adolescence is a key time in establishing reading attitudes and identities, i.e., I am a good reader, so this assignment will be easy, versus I am a poor reader, so why even bother? Increasing student motivation to read independently of the setting should be an important factor of middle school reading classes. The purpose of my study lies in discovering whether it is possible to increase students' reading motivation simply for the sake of performing well on reading tasks, rather than simply because they are reading something they want to be reading. While I did choose texts that I believed were high interest, the more central aspect of my study was to find out how to motivate students to read both in and out of school, and whether this could be accomplished by improving reading efficacy by creating opportunities for feelings of success in a classroom. Reading motivation and reading engagement, clarifying commingled conceptions, was extremely important to my study because I think a lot of teachers tend to use those terms, motivation and engagement, somewhat interchangeably. And while they are related, according to this article, motivation, quote, reveals the direction, intensity, and quality of a person's energies, end quote, while engagement describes, quote, energy activated in the form of a connection between an individual and that individual's actions, end quote. I definitely had to delineate these differences in my study and determine whether I was helping to engage students or motivate them. And since my study seeks to improve students' attitudes toward reading and improve their efficacy, I would classify any improvements in these areas as improvements in motivation. With higher efficacy, students will put higher quality, higher intensity energies and efforts toward reading. The study titled Intrinsic and Extrinsic Reading Motivation as Predictors of Reading Literacy specifically links motivation to literacy rather than just reading performance, and defines literacy as the ability, quote, to understand, use, and reflect on written texts in order to achieve one's goals, to develop one's knowledge and potential, and to participate effectively in society, end quote. This definition of literacy helped me to develop the summative assessment I used at the end of the year in order to see whether student literacy had improved as a result of their predicted improvements in motivation. The study did find that intrinsically motivated students demonstrated greater improvements in literacy, but those who were extrinsically motivated improved as well. Though I seek to shift my students' motivation from extrinsic, something like a grade on a test or praise, to intrinsic, a feeling of competence, success, and pride in their progress, this study valuably explains that even if I'm not successful in helping all of my students become intrinsically motivated, the students who remain extrinsically motivated will also have benefited in some way from the study. Because my students are exclusively English language learners, or ELLs, I knew I needed to incorporate some kind of research specific to effectively helping ELLs improve in matters of reading. For this purpose, I chose the study Reading Motivation, a focus on English language learners. in order to see if my ideas about using formative, low-stakes assessment as a motivational tool would be effective. This article does mention that reading motivation is linked to reading achievement, which bodes well for my students, as I seek to help them to see themselves as high-achieving readers. The findings of this study also emphasize the importance of the sociocultural environment, because ELLs, quote, are motivated to read because of family members and friends in their immediate environment, end quote. This was an ideal circumstance for the study I would perform. Ideally, the formative assessment and feelings of success would create a classroom environment in which the students support one another in improving their reading and got excited about each other's progress. These students have been together since kindergarten, and they already support each other in so many other endeavors that I believed it would help change the reading attitudes of many of the students in the class if I changed the reading attitudes of just a few. The participants of the study in the article were 6 children of, quote, multiple ethnic and linguistic backgrounds, end quote, and at least one of the participants came from a Mandarin-speaking family. So I felt the information was relevant to my study, despite the age differences in the students. The participants in this study were the students in my 8B English class. That's the 8th grade B-level English class. It's 21 students, all 13 and 14 years old, 11 males and 10 females. And at Kingsley High School and junior high, we have block scheduling. So most students get most of their classes every other day on an alternating basis. These students we put into double block English in an effort to kind of boost their English skills in particular and get them ready for 9th grade. These students, because they have always been labeled the B-level students, tend to have low efficacy, but their ability is not necessarily low. Many of them are very, very intelligent, but they lack the English communication skills to show that to their teachers. Some of them are disorganized, some of them are a little bit unmotivated, some of them are just a little lazy, and some of them are kind of undiagnosed learning disabilities and special education cases, but special education doesn't exist in China, so they don't really have the accommodations that they would get in the US. Putting them into this double block English class was our effort to kind of give them some of those accommodations that they would get in an American school. This group of students has been together since kindergarten, so they have a strong sense of community as a class. This is kind of a double-edged sword because while they support each other and are an absolute pleasure to have in class because they are so supportive of one another, they've kind of learned to rely on each other to achieve below their abilities, and it's kind of created an environment of apathy, which is something my co-teacher and I this year really wanted to try and dissipate. And that was another thing that was at the core of this study. The first step in our study after receiving administrative approval was to administer a reading attitude survey to the students, which I'll talk more about in just a minute. Then the process for the study was to kind of go about English class as normal, but every time the students had an independent reading assignment, we gave them a reading quiz. Again, I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. Then, after the reading quizzes, we gave the students a lot of feedback, verbal feedback, written feedback, individual feedback, and group feedback. When they did well, we made sure to be very, very excited about that, and when they did poorly, we were sure to express our disappointment. Throughout this process, we also had informal conferences with students where we asked them how they felt about their improvements, how they thought they could do better, how they were feeling about the books we were reading, things like that. We were hoping this culture of, very strong investment in the literature and in the improvement would lead to improvement. At the end of the study, after 8 weeks of these reading quizzes and all this feedback, we gave them the reading attitude survey again. And then we met with other teachers on the 8th grade team to talk about these students' progress in other content areas. This is an excerpt of the original 15-question reading attitude survey. It gave students 15 statements about reading and had them circle the level to which they agreed with those statements, always, sometimes, or never. I gave them this survey at the beginning of the study. Then there were 8 weeks of quizzes, 20 quizzes in all, and then they took this survey again. I will discuss the results in just one second. This is an example of one of the reading quizzes that we used throughout our study. I know that there's been research done that indicates that random interval assessment is the best way to ensure accountability, like pop quizzes and things like that. But we did administer these quizzes each time the students had an independent reading assignment. So they expected them. But I found that with this particular group of students, that was better for guaranteeing that they actually completed their reading assignments. This quiz is about The Outsiders, which is a book we read at the end of this semester. Each student, they were given 7 minutes to complete each quiz. They had to indicate whether the statement was true or false, and then find the quotation from the text that proves whether that quotation was true or false. Throughout the course of the study, the students took 20 quizzes, just like this one. Now let's take a look at the results of this study. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the responses to the reading attitude survey. One significant pattern in these responses are the improvements in students' attitudes toward the act of reading itself. The number of students who said they never enjoyed reading in school, item number 1, decreased from 12 students to only 3. This indicates a higher level of student engagement in reading, especially when coupled with the 20 students who agreed that reading was at least sometimes interesting, as opposed to the 10 students who agreed with that statement prior to the study. The number of students who said they never read books outside of school also decreased from 13 to 6. Based on these results, it can be concluded that these students have begun to enjoy reading, and in examining their responses to item 15, I only read so that I can get good grades, a pattern of reading for intrinsic purposes is emerging. The other significant pattern that emerges from this chart is the marked improvements in student reading efficacy. There are indications of improvement in reading ability, such as a higher number of students agreeing that they can visualize what they read and agreeing that reading is easy. But the most noteworthy change is in the response to item 8, I am a good reader. Before the study, almost all of the students in this class believed that they were never good readers. By the end of the study, 13 of the 21 students in the class believed that they were good readers some or all of the time. As a baseline for this study, I used my students' first semester grades in English and Language Arts class because this is before the reading quizzes were implemented. The material of the class progressed in difficulty at a standard rate of growth for an average 8th grade curriculum. But this chart indicates the improvements, or lack thereof, in students' final grades in first semester and their final grades in second semester in which the study was performed. The patterns of improvement in this chart are extremely noteworthy. 81% of students improved their scores, and 52% of students improved their scores by greater than 5%. Since the research study included quizzes that would be taken for a grade, it was important to examine the effects of those scores on the semester grades and make sure that the quizzes alone were not inflating their grades too much. At Kingsley Junior High, quiz scores make up 20% of the students' term grades. And in this particular class, the reading quizzes that were part of the research study and vocabulary quizzes were both included in this category. Vocabulary quizzes comprised about 40% of the quiz category grade. The rest of the students' grades were comprised of homework, classwork, tests, and projects. The students' reading quiz scores, which were 60% of their grades in the quiz category only, are included in the write-up of my research study. But as you can see from the results, take Jocelyn, for example. Her class score improved by 13.4%, but she only averaged a 57% on her quizzes. Victor improved his class score by 12.5%, but averaged only about 81% on his quizzes. Felix, whose class grade improved by 17.2%, averaged an 82% on his quizzes. And Leo improved his class score by 10.5% while averaging only 81% on his quizzes, a B. While those averages would certainly help improve their grades a small amount, the large improvements of these students indicate an improvement in reading ability and motivation, rather than just a batch of high quiz scores. Not only did the scores indicate that students were actually completing their reading assignments, like Wayne, for example, who figured out that by the 4th reading quiz that he would need to actually do his reading homework in order to be as successful as his classmates, but improve the classroom reading climate as well. The secondary research question in my study had to do with how an increase in reading performance and success in English class translated to student self-efficacy in other content areas. To gather data on this, a conference was held with all the teachers of this particular 8th grade class, and each student was discussed in detail. The students' first and second semester scores were compared, in addition to a conversation about each student's work ethic and attitude from first semester to second semester. The discussions and conclusions of that conference are outlined in this chart. This chart indicates that 71% of students in this class improved their scores in all 3 content areas during the second semester of the 2015-2016 school year. Throughout the course of this study, students were taught reading strategies and told that those reading strategies could be applied to other types of reading. And the math and science teachers reported that the students would remind each other about these strategies in their classes. 76% of students also had a noticeable improvement in work ethic, which could account for some of their academic successes. But that improvement in work ethic can be attributed to the feelings of success they found in English class. Work ethic alone is not enough to improve scores. Ability and efficacy must also improve. The most remarkable pattern in this chart, the teachers agreed, is the noticeable improvement in the attitudes and confidence levels of these students. And we notice this improvement in class too, not just in the chart. Prior to this research study, most of the participants had never had feelings of success in school. Jocelyn, Brittany, Leo, and Lance had never passed a class at Kingley Junior High. Felix and Victor went from being straight C students to a straight A and straight B student, respectively. Wendy, Ashley, Michael, and Cynthia were off of academic probation and able to participate in extracurricular activities for the first time. A feeling of success in English class, in combination with intensive reading instruction, equipped these students to succeed in other content areas as well. The primary research question posed in this study had to do with the effects of high-frequency, low-stakes assessment on reading performance and efficacy. The students had plenty of ability and intelligence, but because of their low English proficiency, often struggled to keep up with the curriculum taught in English by American teachers. The effects of this study and the assessments were, in short, positive. Students completed independent reading more reliably, demonstrated their understanding, and improved their scores in English class not only by completing the quizzes that were administered as part of the study, but by improving their performance on other class assignments as well. Students also demonstrated improved attitudes and confidence toward reading. These students experienced a feeling of success in an academic setting, many of them for the first time. The secondary research question posed in this study had to do with how that increase in reading performance in English class translated to student self-efficacy in other content areas. Their performances in English improved and boosted their confidence in their abilities to perform well in an academic setting, which then incentivized putting forth more effort in their other classes. Many students improved their grades in all of their core classes, in addition to demonstrating improved work ethics and attitudes towards school in general. The most startling and notable difference in the students throughout the completion of this study, though, was the palpable change in confidence they experienced throughout the semester. Students became very excited to see their scores on these quizzes each day, and many of them even developed an air of competitiveness that drove them to perform at even higher levels. The feeling of success created for these students by these quizzes spiraled into their performances in other classes as well. This study was completed at an international school in China. All of the students speak English as a second language, and the students in this class were those who typically performed at the lowest level of English proficiency in their grades. Because of this, they have double block intensive English study with a head teacher, me, and a co-teacher. This study could be repeated in a more regulation classroom to determine whether this strategy of student motivation is truly successful. It's also part of the Chinese culture to be extremely motivated by extrinsic factors like grades. In a school climate in which grades matter less to students, the quizzes might not have been as effective. What the data presented implies that students who are given the chance to feel successful throughout the semester on low-pressure reading assignments grow in their efficacy across content areas. When students are held accountable for their independent reading more frequently, on small quizzes like this rather than only on unit tests or projects, they're more likely to actually complete that reading and hence grow as readers and as students. This particular group of students made incredible strides in their English ability during this school year. They are nearly unrecognizable from the students they were in August. While no single teacher or factor of the school year can be accredited for this growth, a major factor of their improvement was the accountability this study created for them, the feelings of success the quizzes created for students who previously had none, and the motivation they discovered once they realized that they could be exceptional students.